Welcome, everyone. If you haven't been here before, welcome. If you've been here many, many times before, welcome to you as well. My name is Dot Porter. I am a curator in the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books and Manuscripts in the University of Pennsylvania Libraries. And here I split my time with the Schoenberg Institute for Manuscript Studies, which is a research and development group inside the Kislak Center, and we do manuscript studies, sort of broadly defined. We do a lot of digital work. In fact, my job title is Curator of Digital Research Services, so I have a lot to do with digitization. I also do a lot of video, and I'm really interested in making the physicality of manuscripts more of a thing that we think about, because I think when you look at digitized copies a lot, you kind of lose the physical part of it. And so that's one of the reasons why I like to do this, because it really gives you a chance to see in a way that you don't normally get to see how books are physically. This one that we're going to be looking at today is one that I've been really excited to show you, and also a little bit frightened, although I've been spending some time with it this morning and I'm less frightened than I was. Why would I be frightened of a manuscript? Okay, so it's in this box. I'll open this in a second, but I want you to take a look at this little thing down here. This is what we call called a red dot, if you believe that, a red dot. Very few of our manuscripts in our collections have a red dot, but what that means is the manuscript is physically fragile, and you need to be really careful with it. What it actually means in practical terms is that if you came to work with this manuscript in our reading room, a curator would have to sit with you while you did it, because it's just that fragile. We also have a lot of yellow dots, and that just means be careful. But this one is really more about this. It's really fragile. Why is it fragile? Well, let's take a look. And let me move the camera so we can get a better look at that. Here we go. That's a little more usual for our view. I'll probably move the camera around quite a bit today. So it's in a special box, and I'll turn it so you can see. It's got this drawer, and then it has this sort of envelope on the top. So what's in the drawer, I'll show you this first. Come on. This is the binding, the manuscript's binding. It is a 19th century binding. So this is obviously not the binding that was originally on the manuscript. This is a binding that was placed on this manuscript in the 19th century. Oops. And you can see it's a little hard to see because it's so shiny. These are the threads that were pulled out that used to hold the book together. So that was pulled out and we have it there. And then we have other pieces of the binding and then the binding itself. This is not particularly interesting except as a sort of example of what it used to be bound in. So we can guess that it wasn't a good binding. It was hard to use. It was probably really tight. And so at some point, the manuscript was removed from that binding, and it has now been kept unbound instead of putting a new binding on it. And I don't know if we've ever talked about rebinding this. It's kind of interesting to have a book like this that doesn't have a binding. So the reason that I find this so terrifying to work with is because if I did something silly like dropped it on the floor, it would fall apart. So let me, I'm going to move this out of the way, and then I'll bring this back and we can have a look. So I've talked before, and if you know a bit about manuscripts, you probably know the way that manuscripts are built or made is that you have sheets of parchment that are folded into little booklets that we call quires or gatherings, and then they're sewn together. And I talk about this sometimes when we look at manuscripts in Coffee with a Codex, because it's part of the physical structure, but you very rarely get to see it like this. So here is the first quire of this Bible. And it is a Bible, and I promise I'll talk more about the contents of it, because it is an interesting manuscript, aside from the fact that it is in pieces. But so here's a choir there, and you can see, I'm going to open this up. And so here is, and I need to be really careful, because as you can see, it's no longer a sheet. It's now more like two leaves that are in the process of pulling apart. And I don't want to pull apart any more than it's already been pulled apart. But these were originally sheets, and they've been folded, and you can see the holes here. That's where the sewing went through here. So they were sewn together. And if we go back and look at the larger structure, you can see that not only were there holes to put it through, but they were actually cut through there, here. And that was also part of the binding to put this thing, I guess, I don't know what you call them. I'm not a binding expert. What is the term? Amy, do you know what the term is for the parts of the straps, I guess? I don't know what else to call them.
I think supports.
Oh, just supports, okay. So the supports would go through here, and then it's all sewn together. And that's what holds the book together. That's why the other books that we have don't fall apart. And I'll lift up some more here so you can see. This is just not something that you usually get to see. So this is why I wanted to show this one. And it also gives me a chance to kind of work with this one that I haven't really gotten a chance. So let's talk more about so what is this? It doesn't have a binding. It's a Bible. It's actually similar in a lot of ways to a Bible that we looked at a couple of weeks ago, which if you missed that, you can watch the video on YouTube. It is a Paris Bible, or it's very close to being a Paris Bible. Paris Bible not meaning a Bible that was written in Paris, but a sort of genre of a Bible that became popular in the sort of early to mid 13th century, by about between 1330 and 1230 and 1250, sort of a popular thing. And what the Paris Bible did is it had a particular ordering for the books and the way that it did things. And until 2008, much as the other Bible that we looked at a few weeks ago, MS Codex 1065 is this one, was believed to have been written in France. But 2008 was the year that Paul Sanger came and gave a series of lectures at Penn about Bibles. And he looked at this Bible and the other one and said, no, actually, this manuscript was written in England. And the reason that he said that this was written in England were a couple of reasons. One is because of the ordering of, and now I'm going to forget, the ordering of the interpretations of Hebrew names is sort of a section of the Bible, and I think it's usually at the end, but in this case, it's placed after Psalms. So we're going to go in and see if we can find that. So how do you know where you are when you're looking in a medieval Bible? I guess similarly to our Bible today, the Bible in the Middle Ages was organized according to book and chapter. And so you can see on pretty much every page, these numbers that are in this case, in the margin here. These are chapter numbers. So it's pretty easy to tell what chapter you're in and you know what book you're in, because there are running titles across the top of the page. And would this be Numbers? And I think we're probably in the book of Numbers. What I'm looking for is Psalms. So it's a little more difficult, as you can see, for me to turn the pages, unlike usual where I'm just turning the pages. I'm actually turning the quires, as it were, which is a sort of odd thing to be doing. And it does make me very uncomfortable. So here we are, we're in Job. I can't get too close because then I can't move the book. But let me come out a little bit so you can actually see. I'm very self-conscious. I want you all to know how self-conscious I am about this. This is very uncomfortable. All right. Okay, so we're in Psalms. And I know we're in Psalms because I was here earlier and there's actually no title. There's no title for Psalms. And I don't know why. Is this something that we see?
Yeah, it's actually quite common for Psalms to be the only book that doesn't have running titles because the format of it is so different from the rest of the Bible, it being in verse. So it's actually not as pronounced in this Bible as it is in many, but you just have a lot more capital letters, a lot more color. So you can see here, basically every sentence is starting with a little blue letter or a little red letter.
Yeah, I'll zoom in so we can see that.
And that's different from the rest of the Bible.
Right. So is the idea that you know that you can tell from looking at it that it's Psalms, that you don't need the title at the top?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and we've talked about before the reason for the going back and forth between the red and blue is sort of to help guide your eye a little bit. So it's a sort of guide or help. I also want to point out this. I thought this was really fun. There are a handful of these. At first, I thought this was a bird with like its beak pointing up, but I think it's a little dragon, and I think those are its ears. Its ears there, even though its body looks kind of like a little bird. But we might see more of those. There's a fair number of those when we're here. But if we, there we go. But if we go a few more quires, then here we go. So this is this special section, which is another section that doesn't have a header, because if you know what it is, you can tell what it is. This is the interpretations of Hebrew names. So it's sort of a list of all of the Hebrew names and a description of what those names mean. And it's in alphabetical order. And there are a lot of them. So we are in B and C here. And then we get to the end. And if you, I was reading through some of the accompanying information. So we're at the end of the Psalms, and we get to the Psalms, and then we have the section on the interpretation of Hebrew names. And then we're at the start of a new choir, right? So this is the first page of a new choir. And this is going to be, it's the parable. Is that right? Parables, no. I'm getting the name of it wrong. Is there a Old Testament called Proverbs? That's what I'm thinking. Thank you. Sorry, I'm like, I know that's not right. So this thank you. Yes, we have a couple of people. Proverbs. Yes, it's Proverbs. I don't know where I got parables. Proverbs, and this is actually this is the introduction, or I guess the prologue to Proverbs, and then Proverbs starts here. The Bible that we looked at a couple of weeks ago is bound into volumes. And there was something in the stuff that I was reading through that suggested that, in fact, this may have been designed to be bound in 2 volumes because it's sort of hard to tell. Those are just about equal in size, the same number of quires. And the Proverbs starts out on a new quire and with sort of nicely decorated initials there. It's also very shiny, and I just want to point out say a little bit about the parchment, because I haven't really mentioned that yet. The parchment is what you sometimes see described as or called uterine vellum. Uterine vellum, I would put that in quotes myself, because the idea is that it's parchment that's been made from an unborn calf. So it's, and the thought for this is that it's so fine, and it is, I don't know if you can hear that. It's very quiet, it's very fine, very thin. And this is another thing that sort of adds to its fragility. Because, you know, I showed you at the beginning one of these bifolia, these 2 leaves that are sort of starting to come apart. And one of the things that makes this particular manuscript so hard to work with is because of the parchment is so delicate. But I think it's just the way it's been prepared. It's just very finely prepared. This side is shiny because it is the hair side, I think. Or it might be, you know what I'm wondering, if this may actually have been the front at some point, because this is awfully shiny.
Yeah, it looks like it might have been rubbing up against an inside cover in an earlier phase of its life.
That's what I'm thinking, because we get inside. So this is, let me see. One of the things about so-called uterine vellum is that it's really hard to actually tell the difference between hair and flesh side. So on parchment, sometimes you can really tell which side of the page was on the inside of the animal or the flesh side, and which was on the outside of the animal on the hair side, because you have things like hair follicles. And it's often darker, but this one, when it's so really finely prepared, it's sort of hard to tell. And then you have things like this, where I think you're right, Amy. I think that it may actually have been bound in 2 volumes at some point before the 19th century, because the binding that we have here in our box was for it was bound in a single volume. But I think this may have been 2. Is it? Now that I'm looking at, no, it was definitely bound in 1 volume. But I think it may have been bound twice at some point. So now I'm actually going to turn the pages in here a little bit as much as I can, because one other thing that's notable about this is that it has been really heavily annotated, which is somewhat unusual for Bibles in my experience. That a lot of times Bibles are a bit untouched, but apparently this one was owned by a community of Dominicans. And Dominicans are fairly well known for being well educated. So a lot of Dominicans went to university and became doctors and these sorts of things. And so from the 13th through the 15th century, there are some pretty late notes in here. They were adding annotations, and we see things like manicules, or the little pointing fingers to sort of point out things that were particularly interesting. So there's a question in the chat from Annette asking, how on earth did someone write this? It is such tiny writing, it must have taken hours to copy. I think about this a lot, honestly, because it's very, very tiny writing. You know, and I just don't I don't know. I mean, do they write only in the daytime? You know, because you have to think there wasn't light. Like if it was raining outside, could you write? Or did they write, you know, did they use like glasses to like make it look bigger? I actually don't know that much about scribal scribal practice, really. But it is amazing to think about because it is tiny, tiny, tiny. And of course, not only the writing, but the pages also had to be prepared. So if we look, oh, come on, arm, here we go. If we look here, we can see that the pages were ruled before they were written on. So somebody had to go through and measure, make sure that there were the right number of lines and then draw on the lines. All of this took an awful lot of work, an enormous amount of work. And it would have taken a great deal of time to do that. And also, yeah. Ooh, this is a fun, can you see that manicule on that page? That's just a fun manicule, I thought. So there are a lot of later additions in the margins, but there are also, I noticed, a lot of bits of text that seem to be added by the scribe and that have red lines around them. So I don't know, let's see. Pull out a little bit. Let's keep going. There was one example of a manicule that I saw that's quite far towards the back that I wanted to show you just because it was sort of neat. Are there any other? Oh, Amy adds to my comment, it could well have been by more than one scribe. That's true. Bibles probably came out of big bookmaking operations by monastery workshops at first, later by more secular workshops for university students. That's a good point. So it wasn't necessarily one person. It could have been a number of different people working together. And it wouldn't necessarily be easy to tell because scribes had scripts that they used and everyone would use the same script. It wasn't like, I mean, some scribes have sort of distinctive writing, but also if you had a group of people who were all trained to write in the same way, they wouldn't necessarily, let me see.
And it's harder to see the difference between letters when the writing is so tiny as it is for Bibles like these.
That's a good point. So I want to say that one of these that I'm looking for is around here somewhere. Plus it's just an excuse to get a better look. So now we're in the New Testament now. We're further towards the back. Unfortunately, as you can see, the book has been trimmed, quite possibly in the 19th century or maybe even before when it was bound. So we're missing the, we can see the very bottom of the title, but most of it's missing. Let's see. So Sylvie has a question. Do we know when the page numbers were added? So these page numbers were probably added by Amy when it came into our collection. Yeah. So often. So this is page numbers when they're written in pencil like this, that in the upper right-hand corner, this is our usual practice. And if a manuscript isn't already, oh, that's a pretty initial. If a manuscript isn't already foliated when we get it, then Amy, when she catalogs it, is part of her work. We'll do that. One of the issues that we have occasionally during this this event is that we don't put page numbers in books until we own them. And so there are times when we have books on deposit On deposit, meaning that we hold them, but we don't own them. And those books don't have page numbers or folio numbers. And that can get difficult because it's really hard to navigate a book that doesn't have folio numbers or page numbers, which is one of the reasons Bibles are so great, because in Bibles, it actually is a lot easier to use them because you have so much numbering and the titles. So this is a little Jesus somebody added a little bit later in the margin. The other one is better, so I'm going to find the better Jesus. Let's see, oops. I think he's on 306, if I am remembering correctly. All right. Oh, I'm going to pause and look at this. I hadn't noticed this before, but somebody has added something. Oops. There, this is definitely at least a different hand. I'm not sure what is going on there. And the top of the title has been cut off again, so I'm not even sure what book we're in. But that's sort of interesting and not unusual to see people sort of, if there's space left in a manuscript, somebody will add something to it because that's what people did. Very different from our attitudes today, oops, towards our books. You are not supposed to write in books today. Let's see, 306. Oh, this is lovely. I love this, it's very pretty. And then you've got all this stuff written in the margin. I just think that's so fun. All right, Annette is adding, who would have owned a Bible like this? So this one, I think, was supposed to have been owned by a community of Dominicans. So monastic orders would have owned them. Also, students, university students who were studying the Bible would have owned them. People, did people own their own, like lay people? I know they own things like books of hours. I don't know if they would have owned whole Bibles though.
No, they wouldn't have, and that's more of a Reformation thing. I mean, that's a huge generalization, but for many people, the gospel verses that were in books of hours and the psalm verses were the pieces of the Bible that they had at home.
That was sort of what I thought. So a Bible like this would have been owned by a monastic order or people studying the Bible, priests, things like that, but not regular people. All right, so this is the one, and this is the last thing we'll look at because it's past 12:30. I just wanted to show, I love, you got the little Jesus who's also a manicule pointing up there. So this has been really fun and honestly less scary for me than I thought it would be. I hope this was interesting for you as well. And thank you all for coming. I'll have this up on YouTube in the next couple of days. I hope that you'll come back again. Nick will be here next week, and have a great week, and we'll see you later.